Hello, I am Marcia, and I want to talk to you today about materials for color art 229. Ordinarily I could talk to you about this in person, and you'd be able to ask questions. But I'm going to try to give you a little idea about what I'm looking for in the materials without questions. And if you have questions, I guess send me an email. Basically, I'm going to change my glasses. In understanding what to go to the art buy at the art store or the Michaels or even online, uh, you kind of need a lot of color theory just to begin with. So when I was making up this list, which you'll find on your Canvas page, I was thinking, oh, I need to explain what I'm talking about there. So I'm going to try to. Gouache paint. This is a kind of it's like watercolor. It's water soluble. It usually comes in very small tubes. It's something that designers use. It gives a very matte, flat, lovely finish. And it can be kind of built upon. So it's probably a paint that you may not have used, but it works like watercolor. It's not hard to use. It can be a little bit harder to find. It comes just like every art supply in a jillion different colors and a jillion different brands and a jillion different price points. I want to talk about that because if you go into the store and I come from the age of designer jeans, and so when I was a teenager, people wanted designer jeans, and they cost more than the regular kind, like a lot more. But they were still kind of just denim and blue and pants. With art supplies, they aren't just denim and blue and pants. The more you pay for art supplies in terms of pigment load, so anything that has pigment in it, pastels, colored pencils, paint, oil paint, watercolor, gouache, acrylic, anything that has pigment in it that makes it a color, you're basically the range of prices relates to how much kind of filler is in it. It's like a hot dog. There's a lot of stuff in there that's not meat. So paint has a binder and sometimes some varnishes in it, and it also has pigment, dry, powdered, ground up, physical colored stuff. And the more you spend, pretty much the higher pigment load. That's what artists, how they talk about it. That's the words they use to describe the intensity of color that you get out of a single tube is pigment load. And there'll be much more of it in more expensive art supplies. However, that does not mean you can't get nice things or beautiful art made out of the less expensive stuff. It means that you should spend kind of what you're comfortable with, and if you can afford a little more, you won't be wasting your money. There's lots of tools you can buy that sometimes you get a great one, sometimes you don't. I've got some great cheap paintbrushes, and I've got some really great expensive paintbrushes, and so it's a little trickier to decide which is going to be which, right? But with art supplies, if you're spending more, they're going to be better. Pigments will not only will be more of the powdered pigment in the paint or pastel in a more expensive brand, there will also it'll be ground better. It'll be a finer grind of pigment, and so it might have a different consistency. It would lie down on the paper better. It might be more opaque, which means not transparent, right? Glass is transparent. Opacity is like something you can't see through, like a piece of paper. So let me try to go through this. Back to what I was saying, gouache. Gouache paints come in little tubes, often in a set. This is a pretty big tube of gouache. I will hold it up very close for you to see. Winsor & Newton is a very good brand. It's not the best, it's just a good brand. Lesser brands might be Pelikan is a little bit below. Reeves, Reeves, that's a pretty low quality brand, and it won't have as much pigment in it. Perfectly adequate though. But so why am I even showing you these tubes? If you get a tube this big, it'll be plenty for the whole term. If you get a white tube, I would get a larger tube of white. You end up using a lot of white in color class. What we do when I ordinarily have this class in person is I have a bunch of this and we just share it because you really don't need a tube this big. Not usually. it can be re-wetted. So if you squirt too much out and you want to save it, just let it dry and then put water back onto it and it will rehydrate. So don't ever just throw away a glob of it just because you squished too much out of the tube. Colors. So the reason I need to talk to you about this in person is that to make all the colors of the rainbow, you often hear you only need red, yellow, and blue, or the kind of light colors that they use in printing and the computer. They often talk about the inks colors of cyan, yellow, and magenta. And that's true that you can get a lot of colors out of that. But with artist materials, you're really going to kind of need actually 6 colors. And you're going to need white. So why do you need 6? I'll show you on this package of Pelikan watercolors why. Do you see this blue? This is like an ultramarine blue, like a kind of a more purple blue. Actually, I think I'm saying that wrong. This is the more purple blue, and this is the greener blue because it's closer to green. So you'll need a blue like this that's cool to make colors that are purple, right? To mix with red, you'll need a color that is closer to purple than this blue, which is closer to green. And to make green, you'll need one of these cooler blues. Now, I know you're thinking, wait, what? Basically, you need 2 of the 3 primaries, 2 different kinds of red, 2 different kinds of yellow, and 2 different kinds of blue to get the whole kind of spectrum. I'm going to try to find another example here to show you what I'm talking about. Let's take it one by one. I can see this could turn into like an hour-long video if I don't get on top of it here. All right, lemon or light cadmium yellow. By lemon yellow, I mean a color that looks like a lemon, right? There'll be other colors, there'll be other yellows, maybe called golden yellow or cadmium yellow medium. There's a yellow ochre. You want a yellow that looks quite light and lemony, almost green. Can you see that kind of color? Or this one? These are good choices as a lemony light yellow, okay? What you're going to want for your other yellow, because you need 2, is one that looks like an egg yolk, that looks like this. Can you see how that's really like almost highway stripe yellow? It's coming into orange. You're going to need a yellow that looks like that too. So let's put those together so you can really see the difference. I'm sorry, it's hard to see it. That is a more lemony, greener yellow, and this is a more orangey yellow, right? Can you kind of see that? So if you go into the store and you're thinking, I just want yellow, blue, and red, and then you see my list and you're like, oh, shoot, I need some funny differences, I'm hoping that this will help you know what you need, okay? Then you need 2 different reds. So let's talk about that. You're going to want one red that's really red. It's like a fire engine. This is actually kind of looking darker than it should, but let me find you another one. A red like this, right? A red for mixing oranges, what we call a warm red. But you're also going to need another red. I'm going to open this and show it to you in here. You're going to need a red. This doesn't even really have what I want. Never mind. You're going to need a red that is really much closer to red violet. Can you see that color? I'll actually make a mark with it so you can see the differences. This is what I should have done to start with. Hold on. All right, now we got it. You're going to see this and go, oh, I totally understand. Okay. Here we go. Whoops. Not doing a very good job with my pastels. All right, this is your red, right? It'll be called primary red or cadmium red medium or dark. And then you'll need another color, which on my monitor is looking almost like purple. You'll want it to be called either magenta, rose tyrene, or alizarin crimson. It'll be a red that looks much more close to purple, okay? Same with the yellows. You have a lemony light yellow and a darker golden or medium or dark cadmium yellow. You can get light cadmium and medium cadmium and you'd be all right too. Cadmium is actually the chemical that they grind up to make some of these colors. I think you get it out of the ground. I'm not actually sure. Okay, blues. Back to blues, where I kind of lost track of myself by pointing to the wrong ones. Okay. You'll need a blue, commonly called like ultramarine or primary blue, and you're going to need another blue. And that other blue, this is a little trickier. The blues are kind of the hardest to tell apart, I think. So ultramarine blue is going to look like the blue that you would use to demonstrate blue, right? But it's a little bit cooler. It'd be better for making a purple than this other blue, which would be either phthalo, sometimes it's called, Prussian blue, not usually blue-green though. And sometimes you can find a cyan or a primary blue, and that's going to be probably primary blue will look more like ultramarine. Cyan will look more like the blue-green or the more blue-green color, the Prussian or the phthalo. So you could get primary in cyan or ultramarine in cyan. See what I'm trying to say? Try to find one that to you looks, they talk about in color, they talk about warm and cool colors, and this is actually the key to the whole thing. In some ways, if you could successfully obtain these without knowing anything in the art store, you've learned everything you need to know about color. Because warm and cool is like, I know it's a temperature like value, but what you mean is that if you just split the color wheel in half, kind of down the middle, there'll be one side of it has orange and the like warmer feeling colors on it, and the other side will have the cooler ones, the green, the blue-green, that kind of thing. But within any given color, some reds are warm and some are cool. So, I mean, like, let me give you an example. This is very definitely orange, right? But if I put a little red on there, becomes kind of a warmer red, right? Not a cold red. It doesn't look like purple. Don't worry, we'll be talking about warm and cool so much you'll wish you'd never heard the term. All right, then you need white. So that's your 6 colors plus white. If you're picking up the materials kit, you don't need to worry about this. There's going to be something in there you can use. And don't get too bogged down. Take a good shot at it and don't worry too much. What else can I tell you? I want to talk about the pastels you're going to need. Now, I got 2 kinds of pastels out. My box is really old. This one wasn't even mine. It was my grandmother's. People end up with these kind of pastels all over. They're really cheap, but they're not what you want. It's oil pastels. And oil pastels are lovely, and you will probably have a chance to use something like that. If you already have them, that's great, but don't purchase this. What you really want are chalk pastels or soft pastels. And that's something more like this set. I can sort of show them to you. They're often, sometimes they have a little, like a plastic coating sort of, or like a wrapper on them to hold them together, because they really are very soft. They're like chalk, but they have way more pigment in them. And they are not sticky if you touch them. They are dry, like powdered pigments or chalks. A good brand to get if you aren't sure you're going to love pastels is like a box of Faber-Castells. They'll often sell them in like a half stick. Pastels can come in round sticks or square sticks. That's not really an indication of their quality. Either one is fine. These ones are a brand called Rembrandt. That's a very nice one. Sennelier is a really nice brand of pastels, even better pigments in them. But you don't need to get that good of a set. But you do want it to have a fair number of colors. Like, I'm thinking you probably want a set that has at least 12. And look for the same kinds of things. Look for those 2 reds, a warm and a cool red, a warm and a cool yellow, a warm and a cool blue, and a white. You could get a brown too, maybe, something like that, or a black. When you buy pastels, they almost always come in these sets, and you just kind of get what you get. Occasionally, they're sold in kind of use sets, and by that I mean like there'll be one that says it's for faces or portraits. Don't get that. That's just going to have a bunch of weird peach colors in it. Because of course it's white portraits, right? It's not like the multi-ethnic pack. Then there's going to be, you'll see also a set like for landscape, and that'll have maybe a lot of blue, a lot of green, maybe some brown. You want kind of a like everything, you want like your primary colors in there. You'll be able to find it. If you're really stuck, you can email me and I will send you like specifics that I would recommend, like by linking something like a link to Dick Blick or something like that. If you're wondering where to buy these things, Dick Blick is pretty cheap. It's not like a charming place to shop. It's just a massive online retailer, but it does they ship pretty quick and they are pretty cheap. The sets that I made you up, that you're going to pick up at the art department or have me mail to you, those were made with Dick Blick components. That said, I have been at our local Michael's and managed to get gouache before, and I know they have some pastels as well. Okay, so I've covered those two things, sort of. The next thing you're going to want is assorted brushes. Now, when I say brushes, I mean small brushes. We're working kind of small. You don't need anything huge. If you had a 1/2 inch flat, that'd probably be the biggest one you'd need or want. Maybe a 1 inch or a 3/4. I mean, it's all kind of personal. Like, if you're wandering through the aisles, you kind of want to say, oh, I like that one. That's a good way to buy them. Brushes, if you spend more, they are better. But that said, you could buy a lot of cheap ones for the price of an expensive one and just throw them out every time they got kind of rat-tailed, if you know what I mean. So don't worry too much about brushes. You're basically going to want rounds, which are the ones that are like the ferrule of the paintbrush. And I should probably get one. Hold on. The ferrule of the paintbrush is what holds all the little hairs into the wooden dowel, which is the handle, correct? So the 3 parts of a paintbrush. I'm going to use some big ones because it'll be easier for you to see. These are oil painting brushes. Oil painting brushes almost always have a long handle. It's like a convention thing. I think the idea is that you would be back a little further from your painting, maybe. I don't know. Oil painting brushes also are, this is your brush lecture that you didn't want or need, but I'm telling you it anyway. They're often natural, like hog bristle. Or something like that, because the idea is, the general rule is synthetic brushes for synthetic paint, like acrylic, and natural brushes, like hog's bristle, for oil or watercolor. Watercolor brushes can come in crazy kinds of hair, like mink, and those are very costly brushes. Basically, any synthetic, like nylon brushes, will work in anything. You don't have to worry about that. If you're an artist and you have a lot of different media, maybe you have some oil-based media, some oil paint, and you have some acrylic and some water-based media like watercolor or acrylic, generally you probably won't want to mix the two brushes. Mostly because well, you can mix them. I don't know why I'm even saying this. I generally keep my oil painting brushes in a place where they only ever get into oil paint, and I keep my watercolor brushes in another place where they only touch watercolor. The acrylic paint, and I don't use acrylic paint very much. I will use the watercolor ones with sometimes. Cheap nylon brushes are fine. What you're looking for in a brush is it to come to a nice bevel, right? Like this one's a little shot, but see how it gets narrow at the tip? That's nice. That's really nice in a brush because it gives you more control. This is flat. A flat just means, it's cut blunt and it is not a round, right? This actually is a filbert, and I could talk at length about why a filbert is a filbert because I really love it, but I'm probably going to send something out about that. What it means, actually, this is maybe not a filbert. Oops, sorry, this is a bright. A bright is one where it's curved in right at the edges. Flat is really blunt and squared off. A bright is kind of pinched in like that. The filbert is much more exaggerated and looks more like that, right? It's much more curved. Okay, that's a filbert. That's what these are, filberts. Probably don't need anything this big. The kind of size range you're going to want is going to be really pretty small, like something more like this. This is also a filbert, but it's very tiny. See that? Rounds. Do I have any rounds? Yeah, here's a round. Rounds come in sort of pointy rounds that are sometimes longer, and those are for getting really fine lines. Oddly enough, the longer the bristles, the sort of finer the line. And they come in some other things that are a little more plump, called a mop. and that can just hold a lot more paint, so that if you're making a straight line with the paint, with the brush, you can go a lot further because it's holding a lot of paint up in here. The ferrule, which you heard me speak to you about before, is this metal part, and it's in a pencil also. It's that thing in the pencil. The ferrule is the thing that holds the eraser on the other end. This one's needs a little bit of working. What was I going to say about this? Okay, so most of the paintbrushes you're going to buy are not going to be these crazy long ones. They're going to be like the short little, like 8-10 inches long. They'll be fine. Here's a nylon one. Nylon has a kind of a like almost plasticky white look usually. This is a round, right? You can tell a round from a flat. It's easy. Okay, that's sort of the length of paintbrush you're going to want to get, something more like that. I want to tell you about one other paintbrush because it's kind of a great one. And if you're feeling like, hey, I got all this money for art supplies from financial aid this year, and I really want to get some good stuff, you can try the fan brush. The fan brush is really great for smoothing things together. Even though it looks like a lot of bristles, the fan brush is what you use if you really wanted to stroke away any evidence, any lines that a brush would make. This kind of eliminates brush strokes when it's sort of used properly. Okay, it's called fan because it looks like a fan. There's some things about using paintbrushes, but we don't need to talk about that yet. So let's set that aside a minute. All right, so you could get by with as few as 3 or 4 paintbrushes, but the more you have, the more you can kind of like leave a few of them with some old paint in them. And I don't mean like overnight, but like if you have some in a bucket of water and some in another one, you don't have to keep cleaning them as often the more you have. I guess I'd want 6 or 8, but 4 would do. You know what I mean? You got to kind of pick what you can do. Okay. You're going to need a tablet of Bristol board paper, a 9x12. I think I have that to show you too. Hold on a second. Maybe I'm going to have trouble finding it. I am. Oh, rats. Yeah, I don't know where that is right now. Oh, here it is. That was close. Okay. I don't know why I felt like I had to get this for. It's just a stupid tablet of paper. It doesn't really tell you anything about the quality of the paper. But this is Bristol board. This is recycled, which I kind of like, but it doesn't have to be the recycled. You can get the other kind. It often comes in a yellow. You'll see like a yellow, I think it's a Strathmore that has a really bright yellow cover. I don't know why they would want to make such a bright, anyway, cover for this stuff, but they do. Comes in pads. This one is 9x12. That's what I'd like you to get. It's a kind of a smooth, slightly stiff paper that works well for all media. I don't love it with the pastels. You can use it with pastels. I really like it with the gouache, and it's pretty okay with watercolor too. Which leads me to my next suggestion, is that you try to get some drawing paper for pastels. And I said what I wanted was, you need a tablet of this. We're going to use a fair amount of it. You might be able to split a tablet. If you have some left over from 2D Design, you might have enough. So don't go crazy running out and buying a ton of that. Paper. When you use pastels, there's not a lot of glue in a chalk pastel that aids the pigment in sticking to the paper. So when you draw on pastel paper, it usually has what they call a tooth. It's rough. It's not very smooth. It's got a texture on it that can hold this pastel, right? It can kind of stick in the little tiny holes in the paper. And I want you to get it in neutral colors. This is another color lesson. A neutral color. I mean, not a color you can really name, right? This is kind of neutral. This is kind of neutral. White is neutral, but don't get white. I don't want white. I don't want black. I don't want it too dark, and I don't want it too light. I want it kind of lightish to medium value. Something like the color of cardboard boxes would be lovely. An off-white, like this sort of beige color. Gray, light gray, that'd be great. Lightish to medium-ish neutral colors. It could look a little bit peachy or salmony, but don't get too carried away. Think to yourself, like I'm going to get a sofa that goes with everything, right? You're not going to get it in lipstick red. You're going to say, yeah, I should really get the beige. So get the boring beige paper. or something boring-ish like gray. You won't need that much of that. It's often sold either in tablets, to be sure it's at least 9 by 12, or it'll be sold in big sheets. And that'd be fine. If you got 1 or 2 big sheets, we could tear it down into 4s or cut it into 4 and you'd have plenty. You're also going to want a sketchbook or sketchbook paper. The reason is that if there's one thing that you find out when you're working with getting the right color is you need to try it on something before you stick it on your artwork, right? Because it might not be mixed to the right color yet. So having a lot of sketchbook paper around to practice on, even if it's not in a bound sketchbook, if it's just scrap paper from your printer, that would be okay. It's not as nice, but it would be fine. I think the best advice I can give you about a sketchbook is to get one that you like, that you use. They come in all different sizes, and often art instructors will say, I want it to be 11 by 14, or it has to be 8 by 10, or whatever, 8 by 12, I think. I say get the one that you're likely to use. If you get a really big one, you might not take it with you. You might not. It might not fit in your lap well. If you get a really tiny one, it might make you make really tiny postage stamp art, which would be okay, but be conscious of that, right? If you can't get your arm kind of moving on it, if your sketchbook's only this big, that might be limiting you just a tiny bit. On the other hand, you don't need to be this big either. Okay, so get a sketchbook or use a sketchbook that you have half of left from another class, or even tear the pages out, it doesn't matter. You're not going to be turning a sketchbook into me. It's for you to use. Does that make sense? Yeah. So you won't really need to photograph it that much either in terms of sending me the evidence of the work you've done. Okay, sketchbook, sketch paper. You'll need something to use as a palette. Now, what do I mean by a palette? A palette can mean a group of colors. And it can also mean, like this year's palette is, of smoky eyeshadow is dark gray and beige and reddish brown, or this year's palette of cashmere sweaters is pink and blue and yellow. You know what I'm saying? A palette can mean a grouping of colors. It can also mean something that you use to put your paint on, and that's what I mean. I'm going to talk about palettes over the course of our term, and I'm going to mean both those things interchangeably. So you're just going to have to stay on top of it. What I like as a palette is a piece of glass. This glass is particularly good. It's kind of thick. It's tempered. That means if I drop it, it breaks more like a car window than like glassy, murderous shards, right? But the big thing about this is it's been beveled and sanded on the edges. Standard glass, if you take it out of a picture frame, it's going to have a very sharp, nasty edge on it, and I wouldn't advise using that. A piece of plexiglass, though, would also be fine, right? It might get, that's so funny, I'm making like a ghost image there. You can get plexiglass will scratch a little more, but that doesn't really matter. A piece of plexiglass would be fine. It could even be a very thin piece of plastic, like the transparencies that you get if you're making something with a Xerox machine with a copier. I like to put a piece of white paper behind it because I want to see that color like as cleanly, like as little muddied as I can. So you're going to want something, your palette should be white behind it. If it's plastic, put it on a sheet of white paper. If it's glass, put it on a sheet of white paper. If it's an old plate, don't get an off-white plate. Try to find a whitish white plate, if you know what I mean. An old plate is fine. An old tray is fine. Plastic plate is fine. Like if you bought a plastic picnic plate, that'd be fine. Also, you can get palette paper, which I kind of love. It's this great stuff. It's in a tablet. It's like slick and Mylar-like, and you muck around on it with whatever you want. And when you get tired of it, you can tear that off and go to the next one. It's not as earth-friendly because you're using a sheet of paper every time you mix up a new batch of paint, except for that I use mine over and over. Like I get a lot of use out of mine. I keep scraping it off. But see what you want to do on that. You can decide. If you bought a pad of those, you'd have way more than you needed. You could mix it on anything, really. But just make sure it's white. Palette. A watercolor set is nice, but not required. Watercolors, I think I showed you some. If you want to get a set of watercolors, these Pelikan ones, I think I showed you earlier, are a really good set of inexpensive watercolors. There's a lot of watercolor paint that is inexpensive and really kind of just terrible. Watercolors especially, because it's one of these things we get, what do you get? You get a set of watercolors for kids, It's safe, it's not too messy, but you don't want to put a lot of pigment in there, and you certainly don't want to put in a lot of dangerous pigments like cadmium, because you're not supposed to eat them. And children might. So like if you've got a really cheap, like $2 set of watercolors, it's going to be pretty bad. I've used some watercolor paints and I've been surprised at just how bad they can make it. So spend a little more on watercolors. These are in pans. There's two kinds of ways that watercolor comes, unlike gouache, which is always in a tube. If they're selling you gouache in a pan, and they do sometimes, don't buy that stuff. Get gouache in a tube. Watercolor, it's safe to have it in a pan, or sometimes it's called like no, I think it's a pan. The pan refers to the little dish that holds it. That one just fell out. So funny. Watercolor is dry until you add water to it. You probably already know this. Pelikan makes a nice one, an inexpensive one. The thing in the tube on the side here in this particular set is white. Sometimes the white is in a tube. Often in a watercolor set there will be no black, and that's correct, because you should be trying to mix dark colors like black and not really using them. So don't buy a tube of black unless like you just have to. I think I explained that too. You can get watercolor in tubes, and it's fine to get it that way also. It works great both ways. Whatever you like. Either one is fine. But Pelikan is a nice brand of inexpensive watercolor paint. I was going to say something about the colors. Yes. Like anything, there's ways to geek out, and like a gearhead. And for artists, the paint and the pastels and the pencils and the brushes, this is like all of the geeky gearhead stuff. So if I was getting ready to go to this class and I had not too much limitations on my money, I would probably buy even more colors, because I love them. I love colors, and I would get kind of excited about wanting to know, for example, what does it mean, cobalt pale hue, right? And phthalo blue. Can you see the difference in the color on the label? Of course, it's not really how they look, but I would kind of like want to like see what that meant. And I have a little note in the materials list about that. Specifically when I'm talking about the magenta, rose Tyrian, and alizarin crimson. They're actually very different colors, and they make very different purples, and one will do, but three is kind of more fun. And it's the same with any of these things, right? Cobalt blue is a good primary blue. That could take the place of your ultramarine, maybe. It actually works pretty decently even in making greens, but phthalo blue will make a nicer green, like a green, like a Kelly green. Kelly green can be kind of a hard color to make. It's not true what they say, where if you just take blue and put it with yellow, you're going to get a green. You're going to get greenish colors for sure, but it's not going to be like what you might think of as a true green, perfect green. Like take this chrome light green color. Can you see just on the label? And of course, I mean, the label doesn't necessarily tell you what the inside looks, but the chrome in this is a chemical, and it makes a really glowing, bright green that you can't mix anything like it. I could take blue and yellow and mix it together and have a nice green. And if I add white, I'm not necessarily going to get a saturated, limey, hot green like this chrome green makes. I'll get a pale green, right? But it might not be as vibrant or saturated as this one. So I think for the purposes of our course, 6 colors plus white is great. But if you think, you know what? I really do want to geek out. I want to try all this weird stuff, and it's not a hardship for you to buy a little extra, then I would say go ahead and do it. If you have a friend, a pal, you can maybe like go in together on it, where you buy half of the tubes and they buy the other half, and you can kind of like trade around a little. That's one of the things that's great about doing it on campus, is that we have lots of paint. But it's the kind of thing you could add to later too. You could start out with the minimum and add a little later, whatever you like. I think that's everything I need to tell you. Oh, shoot. There's one other really important thing that isn't on this list, but I'll add it. Is a palette knife. Mixing colors takes mixing, like a physical action of mixing them. And using your brush is a terrible choice because I've got two puddles of color here, right? I've got a yellow and a blue, and I put it into the yellow, and then I smush it over here. Well, now yellow's crawling up these brush bristles right up towards the ferrule. It's that part of the paint is never going to be mixed. So even if I mix up a biggish pile with my brush, I start to lay down the paint, near to the end of my stroke, more yellow is going to show up. Does that make sense? It probably doesn't. I'll show you what you want to use to mix your paint, and don't even worry about that. I'm telling you here what I don't want you to do, and I probably shouldn't even say it. What you're going to want is a palette knife. I have many. Now, palette knives. The nicest ones are metal, but they doesn't have to be a metal one. The plastic one is just fine. And in a real pinch, you could use like a plastic disposable knife. The palette knife is better than the plastic disposable knife. Make no mistake. I think the plastic palette knife, like the kind you can get at like Michael's, costs maybe $2, $3. They're not very expensive. The metal ones are going to be more like $6 or $10. It's real thin at the end and flexible so that you can, there's different kinds. This is the best kind with the offset. Can you see how it bends down here? That's an offset one. This kind is less expensive, but it's a little more of a pain in the butt to use because you have to get low like this against your palette. Let's just use this. So I'm mixing my paint and I have to get this way down here. This, it's already down, right? There's other kinds. I'm sure these will have great names, but I don't remember them. One thing you can get instead of a palette knife from the baking aisle at Michael's or elsewhere is a little offset spatula for frosting. It works just as good, and sometimes these are a little bit less expensive. They tend to be a little stiffer, but that's not going to be a problem. Anyway, you want to use a tool like this to mix the paint because it will help you achieve a much more mixed, like thoroughly combined paint. It will also prevent you from wasting as much in the brushes, in the bristles of the brush. I think this might be in the kit, but it might not be in the kit. Sorry about that. I'll have to double check that. In any case, you're going to want to get one, or you may already have one. If you've taken a couple of art classes, you could have ended up with most of these things. The other things I recommended, I think, are scissors, X-Acto knife, and a glue of some kind. Let's talk for just a second about glue. I like PVA glue, which is like a white glue, and I like Yes Paste, which is a kind of a tub of really interesting sort of gelatinous thing you add water to that doesn't curl papers very much when you're working with collage. Other glues would be fine. You could use rubber cement. You could use glue stick for many of the things we're going to be doing. In fact, that's what I normally use in class. We have a lot of glue sticks. I don't like the rubber cement because I don't like the smell of it. It's pretty toxic smelling. But you should use what you like. You know, I often have students that can't stand how temporary the tack is in the glue stick because they don't stick all that well. It's good enough for me in these exercises, but other people get frustrated. So you'll want some kind of glue. I guess in a pinch it could be tape, but I glue. You probably already have it. I wouldn't worry too much about whatever kind of glue you have will probably be fine. So scissors, X-Acto, you're going to need space. I put on an apron today, even though I am not really doing anything. An apron is a nice thing to have, or an old shirt. I always think I'm not going to get messy, and then I do. So you're going to need a little space to work too. It doesn't have to be a huge space. I think we're not going to be making anything very large. We're not going to make anything bigger than really the 9 by 12, right? So you need a couple 4 square feet of table space like this. You'll probably need containers for water too, and those can just be glasses or plastic cups or paper cups or old yogurt containers, whatever you have around will be fine to hold some water. And I think that's everything. Just send me an email if you have any questions, and if you if you pick up the kit, I don't anticipate you needing much more, except for the glue, the scissors, the X-Acto knife. If you've picked up your kit, should have the pastels, the gouache, and the paintbrushes in it. And I guess I'll see you again soon. Take care and thanks for listening.